let's go ahead and get started. So thank you all for your flexibility, and if you are still up and about and chatting, we'll really encourage you all to get back into your seats so we can hear from the folks we have here up top on the panel. So I want to acknowledge this panel. Let me look at my notes here. We've had the opportunity now through the morning to hear about an example through King County and the Commercial Affordability Pilot Project. And I think something that has been really great to hear about and I'm excited to hear more about is what else is going on, particularly in our region and in our communities here locally particularly, and then have some of that expansiveness from Oscar and some other folks around what else is going on around the country. And so I think I'm really looking forward to this panel to hear a little bit around what happened at sort of point in time after the pilot or through the end of the pilot that helped to spur on some new opportunities and some new examples and programs and models that we can have and some conversation about here. The other thing that I wanted to, that I was excited about this particular panel, as I mentioned earlier, and sort of off the back of Oscar's presentation, which I think is actually great juxtaposition. I love this, and I get to be the moderator, not in the hot seat, is we get to have some representation from city government and some representation from private lending at that banking level, and that was some of the questions that we had as well in our morning panel. So it's great to be able to have that representation here today. So I think what I'd love to just do is dive in and start with some questions, and maybe as I begin, if you all would be willing to introduce yourselves and just say a little bit about yourself as you all get started. And I think we'd go from this way out over to our far left. And so if we can get that microphone, actually you all can keep that microphone, I'll pass this one, yeah. I'd like to welcome Tina and Ken, and if you would just do a little bit of help to us and introduce us into your work and how you find yourselves all in the role and space as it relates to local commercial affordability work.
Hi, I'm Tina Vlacity. I work with LISC Puget Sound. Super excited to have Oscar give some shout outs for my organization. For those of you who don't know, the Local Initiative Support Corporation is a community development financial institution, so we do lending. We also do economic development and community development work, and we operate across the entire country, and so I work for our Puget Sound office, and you heard a little bit about some of our projects in Chicago. I think some of my colleagues in the Bay Area are also engaged in some of the work Noni's doing. And so anyway, so I come with that perspective of an institution that does economic development programming as well as lending. Locally, I will just say that well, first of all, I want to say congratulations to OED and to NDC for their work. I know Heidi's not here, but this commercial affordability are things that we have been talking about in this region for a very, very long time. When I started at the Office of Economic Development way back when in the aughts, 2007, I think, we were talking about commercial displacement, and there was a real lack of tools. And so it's really exciting to me to have a day where we can talk all day about this. Like, that's amazing. And so the work that I am doing locally that relates to this topic is I'm doing some inclusive economic development planning and initiative work in 2 communities in Puget Sound, in the Skyway neighborhood and in the Casino Road neighborhood of Everett. And in particular in Everett, there is going to be a new light rail station. And the light rail station is either going to be sited on or near a strip mall that contains 25 immigrant business owners. And so there's a real concern around displacement and also a recognition that that community ownership of commercial property and permanently affordable housing are critical in stabilizing the community. And so we are working with actually the community investment trust model and a local land trust, so kind of layering some different tools to start talking about how we can have some control over that commercial real estate to be able to retain the commercial center of the community. So
Hello, everybody. Ken Takahashi with JP Morgan Chase. I work in corporate responsibility for the bank. This is a bit of a OED reunion here. I used to work at the City of Seattle Office of Economic Development. I've been at Chase for a little over a year, and then prior to that, I would work for years on this very issue. And so this is really important to me and something that I've worked on for actually most of my career. It's great to hear about all of the different examples of projects and different models out there, and it really kind of reminds me when talking about this issue is to address this in terms of like there's a lot of things that need to go into a project for it to succeed. And at JP Morgan Chase, a big part of my role there is to support communities, support nonprofits working in those communities, to be able to kind of identify what the priorities are and to support them, particularly in small business growth. I'm working kind of on the philanthropic side of the bank. My role is I'm a director of community engagement for the Pacific Northwest. I'm based out of Seattle. And my role is to really build relationships with nonprofits in the area, and I support them with operating grants, and I help to seed some of their projects, some of their programs they want to get off the ground. And then I work closely with a colleague in our philanthropy unit who helps to kind of take that to the next step of, can we help that group go to sort of multi-year support? Can we help them kind of build their programs to a level where it's ready to scale? And then the goal is to bring international folks to support those efforts. Use our connections in talking with other foundations and other groups out there that can work with that nonprofit in the community to make that happen. So a lot of what I do is to have discussions like this that we're having today to understand what are the priorities out there for you in your communities, and then looking for those building blocks to make commercial affordability happen. So do we have a local government that's really engaged in the issue and willing to invest money in the community? Do we have nonprofits that are working closely with that local government to kind of raise up those priorities for the community and have some capacity or willing to work on that, where an organization like Chase can provide some grant funding to get them working on that issue? Do we have some of those building blocks in place? Do we have some projects identified where they could start a pilot project on whether it's commercial affordability with ownership or other forms of commercial affordability? So those are some of the building blocks. And of course, kind of underlying all this is technical assistance, because unless the communities, unless small businesses, unless folks in the community understand what you're talking about, how this model fits in with other models, as we learned about today, there's a lot of models out there. To try to make sense of all of that and to try to kind of pick out which one makes sense for the community. And to a large extent, there's a sort of mixing and matching of some of these different models to fit what works for the local community. So at Chase, we help to kind of support nonprofits to do some of that work with the community to figure that out, and then when you select the kind of the program you want to build, then do we have that technical support to kind of move that forward, to have businesses understand kind of what it is they're getting into, and to kind of have all those experts kind of brought in to model it and to show how it works. So that's a lot of what I do, and happy to talk to you.
I want to acknowledge Chera and Chuck, and we're going to go to you all in a second, and we'll do interjections there. I want to acknowledge Chera and Chuck, and not that we're trying to ignore them. We had a little bit of a scheme around how we might do this, and so I want to sort of do this progression, because I think something that's interesting with the two of you and talking with the two of you and preparing for this. I mean, if I can reference you, Tina, you said, well, I don't have a project example and start to finish, here's the success and here's all my lessons learned. I'm figuring it out right now, and Ken, you're in sort of bits and pieces of that as well. And so I think I'm curious to hear a little bit more from the two of you, and then we'll kind of bring everyone into a full conversation of, we heard earlier this morning in the pilot, and we talked a lot about that timeline, and we're specifically rooted in, the experience of what was happening in 2019, 2020, et cetera. We are now 4 years out from that, and I'm curious from your all's perspective, what are you all seeing right now are sort of the needs for the work, or what are some of the things that you all are trying to be responsive to? Are they the same that we're seeing from 2019? Have things changed? Just a little bit more around, and maybe speak to some of the specific examples of where you are right now and some of the work you're trying to advance.
Yes.
I'm excited about this
Good,
question
good.
because I've been doing a lot of thinking about this. Because one thing that I think was really clear from Oscar's example, and obviously the panel that is to come, is that this issue is not unique to our region. This is something that is happening across the whole country, and especially in communities that are experiencing gentrification, displacement, traditionally communities of color where there's rich cultural and rich history, people are being displaced. And so I love that there are examples and tools. One of the things that I think is particularly unique to our region, maybe it's similar to the Bay Area and some of other coastal communities, but it's that the real estate prices are super expensive. And so like when we're talking about Philadelphia or Englewood in Chicago, where we have, first of all, a number of small parcels that make up a block, it's easier to buy one parcel at a time. And because of the blight in those communities, those parcels are more affordable often. And so the capital raise and dynamic is different. That's not to say it's easy. But it's different than when at least the project that we're talking about is like a strip mall and it's $7 million. And so one of the things that I think it really I'd like to see a national conversation about is a national fund for community ownership of commercial property. Again, because this is happening all over the country. And what is happening is like project by project, we're trying to scrape together the money for these. And we're asking, I think some of the bigger foundations are probably hearing these requests from many, many places. And so how could we do a better job of having some national infrastructure to develop this, to address this, rather than like trying to do each individual? So that's one thing. I think the second thing is just, is really that dynamic of price, and the real estate environment is really challenging. Right now, the interest rate environment's challenging. And I will say, at least when Ken and I were working at the Office of Economic Development way back when we were babies, and we were talking about this, there were not tools to support for-profit businesses. That was like not a thing. And so COVID and like the pandemic really changed the discussion around grants for-profit businesses and really recognizing how important businesses are, especially legacy businesses, in community and in anchoring community. And so I think that's actually a huge opportunity. Is we are having some conversations, and people are open to providing support in ways that I think was just not talked about. So those are a few things that I'm thinking about. And then I guess the last thing I'll say is just, it's also pretty clear from Oscar's examples that you have to have an organization at the center of this who can help community have these conversations, like Noni mentioned, bring together some of the technical expertise. And then like once you buy the building, you gotta manage it. And so just making sure that we are doing the capacity building that's needed to make sure we have really robust, community-based organizations that are responsive to, accountable to the communities who have the expertise to do a good job of managing these buildings in the long term.
Yeah, I don't know if the needs have changed significantly since 2019. I would kind of echo what Tina would say about just the effects of the pandemic in terms of resources. I think it did give an opportunity for local government to try some new things and and there's been sort of a reset on just expectations of investment into small business projects and businesses. And it's great to see that exists, because when I was, before the pandemic, when I was working at city government, it really was not even on the radar of something that happened. So seeing that, and I think now is the time to show that those resources are well served to be in those for those purposes, and that that local government knows what to do with that, and knows how they how should work with local communities. And so I think kind of taking what was an experiment in the pandemic and transforming that into regular programs, I think this is the pivot kind of that's really important that should happen now. There are other things out there, and in terms of what local government could do with changes at the federal level in terms of how CDBG, Community Development Block Grant rules, they could be used for small business support, and it could be more effectively used if some of those rules were changed. And I think for local governments to talk to each other, to lobby for those changes. There's also the lending of credit issue, which has been a non-starter for so many years. But after the pandemic, when people saw that local government could actually use these local funds for small business investment, I think there's a great discussion to be had among local communities about changing those rules about lending of credit, because that opens up more resources to get these pilot projects beyond the pilot stage. And so that's sort of the local government angle. And then in terms of philanthropy, I think there should be much more that should be done to support those efforts. And I'm kind of trying my best to get that started at a larger level. And I think there's more that could be done at that too. So those are just some examples.
Thank you. Okay, I've got one more, and then Chera and Chuck are going to get looped right in. So in some of the examples that you shared, or some of what you are seeing right now, so I'm hearing you all talk about maybe, well, there's a both and. The needs maybe have not changed, or the importance or the intensity hasn't changed, but some of the conditions that have caused a lot of these issues are maybe worsening, or these conditions are becoming a little bit more severe. And you have examples where you said, and we heard that a lot this morning, where perhaps, the silver linings for some folks and some of the business owners that were up here that said, out of the pandemic, at least there was this sort of silver lining that was able to come. And in a lot of ways, we saw those responses as being experiments or pilots, and then all of that sort of sustainability is not something that maybe we're going to see ongoing and moving forward. So I think I'm hearing a little bit from the two of you around maybe the needs are still there, but the conditions are changing in some of those ways. And so I think my other question that I wanted to ask for the two of you before looping everyone else in is, if you could share a little bit more, maybe with some examples of the work that you're involved in right now, and just talk a little bit around, so then what are you coming up against, and what are some of those big questions that you're struggling to figure out to resolve, or struggling to figure out how to help move the needle and move things forward, whether that's, who else needs to be involved and what does that look like, whether it's what other tools, or how do you sort of layer these opportunities together, et cetera. But maybe just, speaking a little bit from the experience that you all are in right now in some of the examples or projects, and saying, I'm coming to you all today in this panel without all the answers, but actually some pretty big questions.
One example is Chase invested in a program that was started by the city, Seattle Restored. It's to activate empty storefronts in downtown, and I think the plan is eventually to go outside of downtown. And I saw that as important to do, because I see that as an example where there's a lot of promise there to build on something where there's opportunity for private-public collaboration on a program that works on many different levels, with not only inviting people back to downtown because it creates more activity, but it gives small businesses, particularly BIPOC-owned businesses, opportunity, access to a market where maybe they didn't have that access before. And there's pairing of technical assistance to help those businesses think beyond just that pop-up opportunity and to think about long-term, how do you transform that into permanent lease somewhere, if not that location. And I see this overall as, can this investment that we're making help to encourage other corporate partners, foundations, to step up and work with the city on a program with activation that can kind of get the city started again. And so I see that as an example where there's more that Chase can do, but we also need to rally other partners to the table to work with the city and to help influence what the city's doing. That's one example. And another example that Chera and Chuck will get to is the Business Community Ownership Fund. My colleague in philanthropy invested in Grow America Fund to get their part of the fund started, to help sort of get the systems, kind of build up the internal capacity a little bit to get the fund going, which helps provide financing to businesses to buy ground floor space. And I see that as an important part of commercial affordability to help take advantage of those properties that might otherwise go to out-of-town developers, and instead is a way for local communities, local businesses to kind of determine their own future by stepping in and buying those properties and having that for the long term. So those are two examples.
Really quick, any big questions that are coming up for you as you've gone through those efforts that you're looking out ahead that you're still wrestling with?
Goes back to another point I made before are there other partners out there who's going to come to the table with funding? Other philanthropic organizations, corporate partners, other groups out there, because there's more that's needed. So.
A couple of just examples of ideas that we've kicked around. So I think, as Ishmael said, I came today with a lot of wonderings and some ideas, but really interested in hearing more about how people are actually doing this work on the ground. But some of the things that we've talked about before, and I don't think really have come up today, is master leasing. So, can you have, for example, a nonprofit or an economic development organization leasing a bunch of space and then subletting that space at affordable rates to small businesses? I think there's definitely opportunities in the ground floor for affordable housing developments, because those developments, lots of times the commercial space is really not the focus of the developers and often sits empty. And so how could we create better partnerships with affordable housing organizations and really activate that space in a way that really serves the community? One other, I think, thing that I think goes along with both of those is lots of times the spaces that are designed for commercial buildings are designed in footprints that are for national chains. Like they're 1,500 square feet, they're 5,000 square feet, they're very large spaces. Those spaces, if you have small businesses fill them up who are retailers, costs a lot of money to fill that space up with inventory. It's really hard to turn that inventory. That's a lot of space to carry. And so I think another thing that could be really interesting, and there's a building in my neighborhood actually that has done this, is they have very small spaces, like maybe 500 square feet or less. And so they have a lot of retailers that have a tiny footprint, and those are really vibrant businesses. And they've been in those spaces for a really long time. Like over 5 years, which is kind of like, low turnover. So, but a big investment commercial property owner doesn't want to have to manage like twice as many leases as they would otherwise. So how could a master tenant situation be able to have somebody who can manage smaller leases for smaller square foot space. I also think sharing space is super interesting. Obviously, there's some organizations like Spice Bridge and some other folks who have done that. So I think there's some ways to get at this too. That's not only about ownership, but about how we organize the space, who maintains the space. And I think that, to Ken's point, I think we have to demonstrate that this is good for the building. This is good for the community. This is not, yes, philanthropy has to be involved, but this is about creating a vibrant commercial corridor and meeting the needs of community and helping people to have economic opportunity. And I think that there are benefits to that because people want to live in buildings with great, commercial tenants in them. And so how do we kind of flip the narrative to be able to talk about how this benefits everyone? Yes, we can talk about equity, and that's super important, and that's really my goal. And I also think that we can talk in language that makes this interesting and viable for a variety of folks to get, I think, better buy-in from some of the private sector folks. So those are some of my wonderings.
Yes, thank you, Tina, for your wonderings. I want to transition here in a second and invite Chera and Chuck into the conversation. I just wanted to underscore something that you were just saying, because I think that also came up a little bit earlier in the day, where we can see the results or the outputs or outcomes of like the pilot project that we talked about this morning, but then are able to sort of showcase some of these things that might otherwise be intangible around sort of the leadership development in community, or some of the impacts that happen and relationships that are formed and possibilities that go sort of way beyond the scale, which is already a massive effort to sort of have that tenant and that opportunity available, but that's to continue to escalate. I was able to speak with Anna a little bit during lunch, and she talked a lot about the role and how she has expanded in sort of her own role and impact in community, and that's the root and home of all of that is her business and that opportunity. So thank you to the two of you to help kick us off with some of these big questions. And I'm not going to suggest that Chera and Chuck have all the answers, but they at least have an example that they can root a little bit more of some of these reflections. And so we thought we would open, similar to in the first panel, with just a short video here on the business community owner. Oh, not yet? Wait for it? Okay. Let's wait for it. Then I'm going to ask the two of you to pick up the microphone and just introduce us into your work a little bit. And then, Chuck, I'll let you cue when the...
Wonderful. I'll do a quick introduction. You do your introduction. I'll answer your question, Ishmael. Hi, everybody. My name is Chera Amlag. Are you all in a food coma yet? Because I'm trying to, wake my body up. So I am the Commercial Affordability and Real Estate Advisor at the City of Seattle Office of Economic Development. Shout out to my colleagues that are in the room back there and around. I program manage two of our major commercial affordability programs that Ken actually talked about, and we work together as well on it. Seattle Restored, which is a pop-up to long-term lease pipeline, where we're starting in the downtown corridor. It's been about a year and a half. And we're matching small businesses to empty storefronts, and the city is through a CBO leasing from 3 to 6 months. And I'll talk about the evolution of that program a little bit later. And then also have the great opportunity to also manage the tenant improvement fund for the city of Seattle as well. So shout out to COO for doing a lot of that pilot and the learning. We definitely learned a lot from that as well. But to answer your question as to what got me here, I wasn't in the commercial affordability space. I wasn't in the economic development space. But prior to coming to the city in 2020, I was a business owner. So I have been a business owner for the last 10 years. And I actually started as a pop-up 10 years ago and went through my own tenant improvements. So bringing that into these programs, I think, has been really helpful. And it's been really exciting, actually, troubleshooting this with colleagues and partners. And then prior to that, I spent about about over 10 years in education. So I supported youth, students, first-generation college students. Actually worked over a decade here in White Center, working at Cascade Middle School and Evergreen High School, helping students, specifically Black, Indigenous, and students of color, navigate the educational system. So, kind of combining all of those things, I actually often think about the small business owners that we're helping, similarly to how I was supporting our first-generation college student. They're oftentimes these micro businesses, first-time, business owners, first-generation business owners that are amazing. They're trailblazing, but they also need a lot of navigation support and kind of access and just not quite knowing exactly what is out there for them. And so as a first-generation college student and a first-generation business owner, I'm definitely bringing that into this work, which is my professional role, but also a very personal role for me as well.
Thanks, Chera. My name is Chuck Depew. I'm a senior managing director with Grow America, previously the National Development Council. We've now kind of rebranded ourselves under a new name, and I'm supposed to say that in any public forum that I'm at. So, Melissa, you can take note that I did that. So I've been involved in this space for a long time. NDC's been around for 55 years. We got our roots doing a lot of work in the Bed-Stuy community in the Bronx. With one of our founders working for Senator Kennedy when he was the senator in New York. We work around the country. Predominantly, we do technical assistance with governments around finance. We do training. We do economic development and housing finance training because most of our clients are not finance professionals. I'm a planner, and yet I do finance all the time, partly because I took art classes, and I realized finance is algebra. It's not calculus, and I really liked algebra for some reason. Before joining NDC, I was involved in the setup of the Office of Economic Development, so it really is kind of, you see the continuity here is you have to be with the Office of Economic Development at some point to really have activity around commercial affordability. So at OED, I have created the organization and was mainly managing the community development functions there. We're investing a lot in community development organizations and trying to help them, grow their businesses within their communities. The funding world changed a little bit, so now it's a little bit more disconcerting in terms of how these things happen. But we come to this in a couple different ways. NDC has 2 CDFIs. So we're a business lender. We manage the statewide loan fund the last couple of years called the Flex Fund, provide about $95 million worth of business lending around the state. We do tax credit investments, we do housing investments, all kinds of different things. We're pretty clever, and we don't like following rules. I kind of like Oscar's rules around, if you're in a room and people aren't really listening to you, you need to be in a different room with different people. I mean, that's my paraphrase. My style is more of, instead of changing the people, I'd rather change the vocabulary that they're using. So really the 2 things that kind of launched this effort was, one, as Melissa talked about and you heard in the panel this morning, lots of things we learned in this panel. Timing, we were limited in timing, so we took projects we thought were impactful, but they were only the projects that were ready at that time that we could find. There's a lot of other projects out there, and we were pretty candid and frustrated that we couldn't act on those, we just didn't have the time. And then there's all kinds of reasons why businesses are paying a higher cost for a space than they should, because we're asking business owners to manage real estate. And that's not what they do. So all of them had cost overruns. Not that that was unavoidable, that happens with construction. It's really hard to manage construction. But we're trying to make them do something that's not what they do. So that wraparound services you'll hear a lot, the services that OED has been lining up to provide business owners with a range of consultants and expertise for the various questions, that's all essential to move this. But at the end of the day, the real thing was you got to call funders question. If you can't stand up a program and have meaningful capital to deploy, then you're never going to touch commercial affordability because you're always going to miss opportunities. And that was really the big challenge. You had to be proactive. And fortunately, the pandemic came along and we had all this money. Ken was at OED at that time. We'd been working on this a little while, but now there was money, there were resources. And again, because of the pandemic, governments could break the rules. So we could invest in things that we couldn't have invested in before. City of Seattle put $7.6 million on the table. That's a pretty good chunk of money. That's more than a lot of the pilots that Oscar was showing in some of these community projects to stand something up. So that was a big opportunity, the lessons learned by the process that Melissa managed with that pilot. The second thing was Ken and I were in a conversation with a well-regarded affordable housing developer, talking about how do we help the businesses in their ground floor get more affordability. And what was very clear is that in the affordable housing world, we never, ever talk about how much we subsidize people's rents. We never say, gosh, we're giving you $1,500 off a month for your rent. Isn't that great? We talk about it in the affirmative. We're making sure this rent is affordable to you based on some figures that we're pretty confident with. But in the commercial affordability world, we didn't have that language. We kept going around with, well, we're giving you $5 off the market rent in this neighborhood. It's like, yeah, but before they were paying $15 a square foot. $5 off is now they're going to have to pay $10 a square foot more. So 80% of their rent is going up, and you're saying that's affordable. And it has nothing to do with what the business can afford. It has to do with other metrics external to the business. So it was a big struggle recognizing we don't have a vocabulary around commercial affordability. So fortunately, we started to play around with this in a way to be heretical, to be a bit of a window breaker and look at this. I'm an approach from the business perspective. We're involved in real estate, but it's about the business being successful long term. And if the business is successful long term, that's how we grow wealth within the community. It's the business being successful. So now I think we've got a little video that we put together to kind of help explain the program. It'll be much simpler than if I explained it because I'll always get into the details and that's too confusing.
This is Lily. She has operated her salon in Southeast Seattle for 20 years, and she has grown a dedicated customer base of people who live and work in the neighborhood. As new developments have risen around her salon, Lily's rent has nearly doubled. She's struggling to keep her storefront open and will either have to relocate or close permanently. Lily will have lost her primary source of income, and her community will have lost a treasured local business. The Business Community Ownership Fund can help small businesses and communities like Lily's. The fund invests in newly renovated ground floor commercial spaces all over Seattle, where business owners can get the resources they need to control their own destinies. Here's how it works. Lily and the BCO Fund form a partnership to purchase a commercial space in a mixed-use building that's perfect for her salon. Lily's salon then leases that space from the partnership at a below-market price. Her lease payments remain flat while rents around her increase. Lily has greater stability and control to invest in her business, a community of support with other small business owners, and access to tools and resources, including business financing, that promote her future growth. She may also see an increase in income and value that she can invest back into her business. And her business is still contributing to the vibrancy of the neighborhood. If you think your business or development project would benefit from partnering with the Business Community Ownership Fund, contact us today. The Business Community Ownership Fund. Invested, empowered, rooted. Brought to you in partnership with the City of Seattle's Office of Economic Development and Grow America.
Yeah, we got the Grow America in there. You noticed that?
I was gonna say, yeah, the good timing. You know, you got it. You snuck it in there. I noticed the NDC on some of the papers here. So somewhere in between printing these sheets of paper and that video being made, Grow America was born. Thank you for kicking that off, Chuck. And so I would love for the two of you, Chera and Chuck, to share a little bit more about the program, the Business Community Ownership Fund, and maybe if you reflect on how the morning panel talked about some of the key components of the model for the pilot project. There was the technical advisory group, there was the technical assistance, the way the lending was handled, et cetera. What are some of the critical elements of the Business Community Ownership Funds? Where are places where there's been consistencies, you've had to come up with new solutions, et cetera?
Absolutely. I was wondering, do you guys have this? Would you mind putting that up? Okay. So one of the things that I think is really, really important is understand. I go by this no history, no self. No history, no self. And so as a community of practitioners, I think it is important for us to understand what came before us and all the work that was actually done that helped bring us to where we're at. And Tina, you were talking about this goes way before 2016, but I wanted to just frame this conversation because I wanted to know when I first came on board with the City of Seattle in 2020, where did this come from? I know where the funding came from, but this didn't just fall from the sky, obviously, like these programs that we're going to be talking about. So I just wanted to share a little bit about the history that brought us to the strategies that we're implementing today with our funding. So back in 2016, former Mayor Murray put together a commercial affordability task force that really started bringing small business community members together, developers together, different folks from the music and art community, and provided some recommendations on how to support commercial affordability. And some high-level recommendations were more technical assistance, an actual body of folks that were really going to work on this and focus and prioritize this. And so through that, there were some commercial affordability workshops in the CID, and I actually supported one of those before I even knew about OED. And so they were definitely reaching out to community. They were reaching out to other business owners to try to share experiences specifically about tenant improvement and what does that process look like. And then you've got tenant improvement pilot projects, which my colleague Ken here can probably talk better than me, but the city started piloting some tenant improvement pilot projects in our equity districts, right? And so many of you might have heard of Communion or Simply Soulful, or obviously this morning, Catfish Corner, I believe we were able to provide a little bit, contribute towards that as well, and learned a lot. And then George Floyd, right? And I think the city knew that the disinvestment historically, this was a response to that. And so some intentional investments came in terms of Equitable Communities Initiative Task Force. And within that, there were 4 major pillars: education, health, business, and what was the other one? I have it in my notes. Business, housing, health, and education. And so through that, there were some folks on that task force from community, again, brought together different sectors that provided some recommendations. And through that were technical assistance and the interest in pop-ups. How do we provide support to businesses that just might want to just on a low barrier be able to access the market and test their product out? And then only in Seattle, which is the first program that I came from with OED, we had the community wealth building cohort that my colleague Heidi as well as Ken really helped bring together our business district organizations and other community partners that helped inform actually the community business community ownership fund. And so that came from work within some community partners and business district organizations. And then this kind of brings us to kind of closer to today, where we've got, the future of Seattle economy, where OED really brought together a lot of different sectors and folks representing different interests to come together and bring forward some recommendations as well. And so, I'm just kind of putting this here to showcase a trajectory that has brought us to the different strategies that we have today. And BCOF being one, but the wealth building group that I am a part of, our team, is a team that has been piloting for the last 2 years, right? I'm looking over to Ken because he was very, very instrumental in some of those pilots. And so the 3 major commercial affordability programs that we have are BCOF, we've got the Tenant Improvement Fund, and Seattle Restored. And so the way that we think about all of these strategies is really trying to close the racial wealth gap and really look at the displacement that's happening. And so we don't think there's a one-size-fits-all strategy for this. You really have to tackle it in different strategies. And so, and with all of those strategies, the access to capital and affordable capital really runs through and is woven in all of that. And so I just wanted to frame this conversation as to what led us here, but also why the strategies. And just kind of going off of what Chuck was saying, you know, it's one thing to throw money at a business and say, and then be able to say, here's a shiny, you know, newly built out restaurant. And it's another thing to talk about commercial affordability and then generational wealth as well. And just because you have a business in a, you know, you're able to get them open through some support and subsidies doesn't mean that they're going to actually generate wealth. Because wealth generation comes from the profit that a business is able to get and see at the end. And if we're not able to provide the technical assistance and those wraparound services, then it's really challenging for a business to actually profit in the city, especially when we're talking about those in hospitality. And a lot of the pilots that we have supported are restaurants, right? And if you can profit 2%, in the restaurant industry, you're doing well. And so when we approached our programs, we really thought about the technical assistance and the coaching that's needed and not just the cash award. So as we built the Tenant Improvement Fund, we knew that you can't just give a cash award. And to quote one of our awardees, she said, "The service packages, the technical assistance that I'm getting is just as valuable as the cash award itself." So we're providing up to $100,000 to small businesses to fill gaps within their tenant improvement projects. And through that, we hope that, you know, they're successful and the overhead is lowered, but at the same time, to get there successfully, they're also getting a slew of other technical assistance and business coaching from architect and design, to expedited permitting, to business development, to accounting support, to marketing support, to branding support. And so what the panel was saying earlier today is so critical. You cannot just put out cash awards without the actual technical assistance supports around them. So I'll stop there. And, yeah.
So we were lucky that, again, OED in the pandemic had gone through this progression of how to understand business development, how to maintain businesses, and how to invest in them with services as well as technical assistance. Through the pilot, and especially, you know, Terrell's example that you heard about, if you're a business, you're lucky enough to find a space, you're negotiating with your lawyer. The landlord's lawyer throws you a 30-page lease. You're going to guarantee the lease for the life of the lease. The landlord's going to give you a tenant improvement allowance. It's never the full improvement costs of what your building is going to do, but they're going to give you some money and you're going to pay a rent. You may or may not blanch at that rent. But then where's the rest of the money going to come from for your tenant improvement to improve that building and make it work? Well, you're probably going to borrow it, or you're going to go to friends and family. And at Grow America, we're a business lender. We don't want you to be we don't want you to be borrowing money, increasing the debt cost to your business for improvements that go to the landlord. You don't own those improvements, and yet your business has to pay for those improvements. So we wanted to look at this in a different way where the business owner is in more control and in more stability. Again, in neighborhood leases, we're seeing a lease, and then the lease is automatically escalating 3.5% a year. So that chart that you saw for Lily's rent, that's a real chart. Over the 30-year affordability period, that rent increase that her lease would say, now there's lots of assumptions over 30 years, but not having those increases saves her $600,000. At a certain point, that's real money. So we want to see the business's money goes into running the business. That's where they need the cash. So we wanted to separate things. We started with OED with immediately going involved in engaging community partners. Who are those community stakeholders, some business owners, the people that represent community? Everything we did in terms of messaging, in terms of program shape, in terms of our graphics and identity, those were all kind of vouched for everybody because we wanted to make sure it was rooted that way. And then in the NDC world, since we do a lot of this investing, I wanted to keep it simple in terms of the real estate approach. We know all about a lot of these other examples. There's a group in Seattle that's looking at the Ujima model in Boston. There's another group, we looked at the Portland, the Mercy Corps project in Portland. There's lots of reasons why those may or may not work, but they're not working fast enough for the problem. And so we wanted to create a system that was much more simple, just using basic real estate partnerships. If the community can come together as an investor in space, we can easily involve that community organization in the ownership structure of the partnership. If there's an investor that wants to be a philanthropic investor and be involved in the real estate and get tax benefits, we can easily involve them in that real estate partnership. So we think it's a little simpler, mechanism for moving things forward. But we're setting what we think is an affordable rent, which is slightly below market. We did our first project in the Mount Baker area of Seattle at McClellan and Rainier Avenue. The first tenant was a design firm. It wasn't a retail firm. It wasn't a restaurant. We have those, and they scare us to death because they're scary. But it's a design firm, minority-owned design firm. They were featured in the International Examiner yesterday. But they're moving out of their house, growing their business. They provide design services to commercial businesses, so it was a nice synergy. But the rent we set at $25 a square foot plus expenses. So that rent will never change. It will stay that way for the entire 30 years of our affordability program. And we've wrapped around our capital sources behind that. And the challenge is, it's not a complicated thing. But the challenge is, so I'll get right to the challenges. What we need is, the problem in Seattle, in this area, based on where our pilot was, is costs continue to go up. Everybody, for some reason, thinks their property is worth more now than it was last year. They haven't heard about inflation, and they haven't heard about the Fed and raising rates. So it still costs us a lot to acquire. Construction costs are still high. And we actually have an affordability target. We're trying to hit a rent level of $25 a square foot. So we know what we can afford to borrow. So the math is pretty simple. We need to backfill that with sources that don't require return. So we need the help of philanthropy, who talks about wanting to be involved in minority business affordability. We need those people to step up because the math is pretty simple. But now, at least in Seattle, we have a term for commercial affordability. It's not a percent below market, and it's not a rent that's going to escalate every year. And we're not going to have a renewal discussion in the 7th year, and maybe you'll get to stay in the building or not. You're going to be there as long as you can run your business, and the rent will never change. So feel confident in growing your business, invest in your business, and take that revenue and use that revenue to increase the value of business and grow wealth. So it's a relatively simple. There's a lot of complicated mechanics, obviously, that I'm more than happy to go into because I really like complication. But it's that way. And again, we were lucky because Ken had kind of spearheaded this at the city. I knew enough about the city to be dangerous. And OED had already been involved with businesses to understand what they needed and what they didn't need. And now we were ready we have to control the asset. You can't depend on the private market forever. We can't even depend on housing developers to help respond to this problem because they have their own issues. At some point, you just got to control the asset, kind of any means necessary at that point.
Thank you, Chuck. I want to say two things, and then I want to make sure that we have time this time around to make sure we get some questions from the audience. It's funny. At some point, I ended up seeing all the promotion for the Business Community Ownership Fund, and I was like, oh my God, that Sergio and Sonia are was one of my closest friends. Sergio especially is one of my closest friends. So I sent him a picture of everything, and he said, "Say hi to Chuck." And
that's why we brought them into the program because we heard they were.
Yeah. Yes. Right. They knew that I would promote that.
Then you have to know.
Yeah, and work at OED. So I think I'm going to put a question out there, but I want to get some questions from the audience, and I want to make sure we have the opportunity for Chuck to answer that question a little bit earlier. But I think you started to mention it just now, Chuck, and Ken, you were saying something similar earlier, where we think about that timeline graphic that you shared, Chera, and I really have resonated on this term, Ken, that you mentioned around sort of building blocks, and thinking about as that timeline goes out further, sort of what are some of those other critical building blocks that are necessary. You talked about other forms of investment in philanthropy. Chuck, you mentioned a similar thing just now. And so that's sort of on my mind. And I want to go to the audience here first. But if you all sort of have that ruminating on your mind, please try to weave that in. But I think I saw a hand up over here. And you had a question in the first panel. So look at us all the way back.
This is a different question, though. With you keeping rents at the same rate, how do you prepare to be able to maintain the property if costs go up over time?
What we've done is we do a lot of.
Yeah,
The question was if we're gonna keep flat rents, how do we make sure that we have dollars for capital improvements and other needs that may happen with the building over time? And I think the simple answer is we've looked at this as a fund approach when we do a lot of tax credit investments. We're overfunding the capital budget. So when we closed on our deal, we have reserves that we've funded. So if the business fails, businesses will fail. Again, we control the space, so it's available again in the neighborhood for the next business. But we have dollars to help carry through those operating issues. We have a capital reserve account. We have some other fee reserves, so the rents aren't paying any of our NDC costs for the term. They're just paying their own costs. So we tried to do that as a way of offsetting that future risk where it comes from. That means the program is a little bit more expensive. We're really doing it like a housing project, which is you fund reserves, 6 months of operating reserves, capital reserves to anticipate those things. We're following that same approach. But we're trying to reduce the burden as much as we can on the business because who knows what their cash position is going to be like at that time.
I think in terms of looking forward in the future of this timeline, I think about a lot of the conversation today has been around ownership, right? And I think that is truly when we're trying to move the needle, you want to be able to have the small business own their own, their space and that asset so that they have truly that full control. I also know that takes a lot of money and that a handful of businesses are going to benefit from that. And so I think the multi-pronged approach of understanding commercial affordability at all phases of a business is really critical. Because when you're talking about scale and you're talking about being able to serve as many businesses in your geography as possible, we do have to think about how does one get to the place where they're even viable to be, able to be a business that can be a BCOF recipient. And so in what we've learned in both the Seattle Restored Program and the Tenant Improvement Fund is that businesses are at very distinct phases, right? And so you might have a micro business that really they need their vendor market subsidized, right? Because how can they get to the brick and mortar if they can't grow their business from going to the craft fairs and going to the farmers markets to then grow and be able to hire an employee, be able to grow their brand and have folks know who they are, right? So you've got that one. So in Seattle Restored, we're starting to really distinctly think about those phases and fund those phases. So we'll be funding vendor markets at businesses for micro businesses. And then you've got your businesses that are primed and ready to go into a brick and mortar. Maybe they are not prepared yet to sign, an ownership or be in a legal contract, right, to do that for whatever reason. But you still can generate wealth, and we still need to make that affordable because for most businesses, that's not even accessible to them, right? And so, like what Tina said, we're finding that the commercial real estate market, and I think a lot of folks in this room know that, they are built for larger businesses. And if our cities do not start subsidizing, these empty storefronts, we are going to turn into cities with just big box retailers. So this is a very, very critical time to utilize our money and our tax dollars really wisely. And so part of that is being able to subsidize at a pop-up level to see if they can grow and transition into that long-term lease. So we are going to be starting master leasing. One, and not just what you think in terms of your regular, brick and mortar retailer, but Seattle is Seattle because of our creative entrepreneurs. And so Seattle Restored takes both those creative entrepreneurs and artists as well as your, more typical retailers and really supporting that part of brick and mortar, subsidies and starting to, at minimum, master lease at a 1 year with an ideal at 3 years. So we do have a project on 3rd Avenue where we're working with a tenant who's got a really great lease. And we are going in there and we're supporting tenant improvements, and we're also, in exchange, going to be provided the public benefit of 18 commercial affordable studio spaces for artists downtown. You're not only providing commercial affordable spaces, but you're also activating specific business corridors that are very much need that. And then, so again, it's the spectrum of services, it's the spectrum of strategies that I think is extremely important. And then on top of that, smart investments. And so one of the things that we're hoping to do next year is to provide funding to do retail strategies and retail corridor, research in specific equity neighborhoods so that we understand what is there and then what is missing, get an actual inventory of property owners and, property managers and ask around. Like I was just in Genesee and one of the business owners was saying, we just need more foot traffic. And I said, well, what's missing here? And she goes, a coffee shop. When Tully's left, that was really hard. And it was never a Tully. There's no coffee shop in the area. So if we're able to understand that, the mix, the right retail mix, then we can really start to be smarter with our city investments and say, if we're providing these subsidies and we're helping match, we're going to be able to really go out there and say, okay, not just which business can go in here, but what's the right business to go in here. Because, we had 507 applications for our tenant improvement fund the first round. We were funding 37 this year. Seattle Restored, 2 rounds, same. About 700 applications, and we've matched about 80. So, and that's great. Kudos, great, but there's more work to be done and more intentional and aligned work. And so I think being able to continue that conversation of what truly is the right investment so that the impact and the multiplier effect could really be felt.
Yeah. Thank you, Chera. That was excellent. I know that we are getting close to time here, and I think this is the part in the day where we have less flexibility and sort of how much longer we'll be going. But I know that there's another question in the back, and then we'll look to close. Thank you all for teaming on that. Yes, go ahead.
So real quickly before I ask my question, I do want to say I'm a Seattle Restored participant. I'm an artist, so thank you guys. Take my race hat off, my 9-to-5 hat on. So I'm in the city of Tacoma as Community and Economic Development Department. I run the city of Tacoma's revolving loan fund. So we are unique in our position as a municipality that has a small business loan portfolio that we've had since 1979. But what we lack is a strong and robust network of organizations to help us deploy some of that money when it comes to some of the kinds of programs and things like some of the folks from the previous panel. So and also too thinking of some of the other folks like the one I'm sitting next to here from the city of Burien, and especially as we're thinking about Seattle and affordability as a whole, we have a lot of folks of color who are moving out of Seattle to these smaller municipalities who are far less resourced than our neighbors in King County. What are your insights or recommendations into what municipalities who are looking to try to do some of these similar kind of things but do not have that strong resource, nonprofit, organizational network or philanthropic relationships that are needed as a backbone to provide that like wraparound. And just as a quick context, like we have a legacy business in the Hilltop that we are working with that has the opportunity to purchase the building and the land in an additional parcel that they are on from their landlord for a really good price. But we've been working with this particular business, and I haven't even gotten the application for the loan funds that we have. That we were going to use some CDBG and also our revolving loan fund for them to be able to purchase their land and the building, but we don't have the partners to be able to scale them up to take advantage of the opportunity.
Yeah, thank you so much. I'm going to repeat the question just really quickly for the online, and then anyone who would like to answer. So you are talking about being in Tacoma, working with the city of Tacoma. There is a tool available, a revolving loan fund, and we have an acknowledgement of the way dynamics and population dynamics have changed, and you have folks in Tacoma and in community that could benefit or are experiencing some of these conditions that we talked about earlier. Even though the tools are available, you aren't seeing a relatively similar level of a network of potential partners in the nonprofit side to help manage and take advantage of some of the opportunities. And so your question is, how can the city help to sort of catalyze some of that, or how can the city help to bring some of those, fill some gaps?
Yeah, I would just say a couple things. Well, first is, Melissa Lafayette. Oh, Melissa, can you stand?
Oh, we know each other.
Because I think the key thing for you to think about, obviously OED has done a great job of funding services, and maybe we all think Seattle has a wad of money and they just throw it away cavalierly, and we don't have that kind of money. I think that's a matter of priorities. If it's important, you can find the money for it. But one of the things you should be looking at is the state of Washington will be starting soon on a variety of programs related to their SSBCI program, their Small Business Credit Initiative, Treasury dollars that are going to flow. $140 million is a number of programs that will be coming out under that program, a variety of different ones. There's going to be a collateral support program that's going to be, I think, run by Heritage Bank that's specifically looking at real estate ownership for minority businesses. We'll be doing a revenue-based program that has different kinds of flexibilities. Actually, Dion Cook in the back of the room is going to be one of those lending partners there. So I would say, because we know your program really well, is look to leverage these other capital sources so you can stretch your dollars rather than solely depending on your dollars. I think that's the best way you can make it work and get some other partners involved in supporting those businesses.
Yes, the last one, and then we're gonna close and move on.
It's really important to say that, especially when you start talking about brown and black people, that even though there are grants and opportunities out there, a lot of the times we're just so capacity. I mean, because I know myself, I'm always trying to look for grants, but at times, just life itself and you can running a business, it's the capacity that I don't have to get there and fill out that application. And I really think that you probably want to really focus on getting a pool of people that say, hey, who can, she's looking for more people to get out there and really help people, because it's not like you can just say, okay, I'm going to fill out the application, because you're in the office doing the work. But capacity, for myself, oftentimes I need stuff, but I don't have the time for it, because I have an MS husband, a business to run, and a house. And it just doesn't work out that I miss a lot of grant opportunities that my organization definitely needs. We need to really recognize that capacity and that thing.
Yeah. Thank you for sharing that. And just to summarize again for the microphone and folks at home, yeah, it's this really unfortunate sort of cycle and snake chasing its tail where, try desperately to come to and create the conditions to have an opportunity or a tool available, but it's in response, going back to the start of the conversation of what some of the needs are and what some of the contexts are, but folks are living through those contexts, and so in and of themselves, in many cases, are struggling. So even when the tool is available, you said, to quote you, it's your own capacity challenges that may prevent you from an opportunity. And so it's a balance of all of those things, the network, the capacity building. And when we talked about sort of phases of business, that's a very early phase, and sort of just the idea and being able to put yourself out there and get on a track. So, okay.
I know you want to wrap us up, but I don't want to wrap up yet. But I just want to ask for I need one big favor from the room. Okay. I want to follow up a little bit on what Tina said, where one of the biggest opportunities we have coming forward, and it'll be there forever because the transit agencies take forever to do whatever they say they're going to do. But we're building mixed-use projects all over the Puget Sound. All of them have a ground floor commercial space. Right? Not every space is a good space for a business. So you have to know what's good for a business, what's not. But I'll tell you this, we're spending millions of dollars on housing projects. That ground floor pedestal, that's the foundation of the housing. That's just as if you did pillars in the ground. And yet we're spending the money for that space, and yet I have to buy it again for commercial affordability. Because the housing people don't want to see $1 of housing go to non-housing costs. But we've already spent the money. So the biggest source of help that we could do in affordable housing is let that housing dollar get spent once. Don't make us buy that commercial space because you needed to pay for it to build your housing. I'll invest inside this space, that's fair. But no, don't make me buy the shell. So whenever you hear anybody talking in the housing funding world, tell them that. You'll get an interesting response from them, but I would appreciate you just yell at them whenever you get a chance.
I love. I think we're gonna wrap here, and so.
I gotta say there's one thing. The same problem, every state. It comes from the Housing Finance Agency that hands out the low-income housing tax credits. Every state has this problem, and why? Why? Just letting you know, you're not the only one.
No, that's right.
They don't change the way they approach finding the commercial tenants. They just live it to a leasing agent to do it like the market would do it. And when you got to find a space that will fit a neighborhood, it's a different approach, and it's taking that Main Street approach into these big projects. And I think I see it in the suburbs all the time. Why are they empty? Because they're going after somebody who says, I'm not going to go to a low-income housing project.
Ishmael's starting to get stood up.
Yeah, he's made himself really big. Just take the space. Thank you all, everyone, for this panel.